So, welcome everyone to the PAX Online panel Beyond 101 Representation in Indies, the Industry, and Beyond. I am super excited because we have an incredible group of panelists here ready to talk a little bit more about what representation is looking like currently in the industry, how we can celebrate things that are being done well, and some of the specific changes that we'd like to see and specific actions we can take to continue improving the space so that everyone feels represented and we can get games for everybody. So the first thing to do is, before discussing any of these topics, is introduce everybody. So I'd love to start with Josh. If you could start by introducing yourself, your pronouns, and what you do, that would be awesome.
Hey, I'm Josh. Pronouns he, him. I run a site called Intelligame. We make connections between games and the real world. And I stream, podcast, all sorts of stuff.
Cara?
Hi, I'm Cara, pronouns she, her. I'm a writer and narrative designer. I've worked on Asagao Academy, To Be With You, and Solstice, to name a few. And I also stream on Twitch as well.
Tanya?
Hi there, I'm Tanya. I go by pronouns she, her. I am the director of Foundry, and what we're creating currently is a narrative-driven choice drama game in a cyberpunk world by the name of Solstice, and we are talking about a lot of exciting elements of intimacy in a cyberspace world in which there is a biotech revolution happening and a lot of militarization, and how can you find your friends within it.
Cool. And last but not least, Victoria?
Hi, I'm Victoria Tran. I go by she, her, and I'm the communications director at Kitfox Games. We're currently making a game called Boykin Detention, which is a dating simulator dungeon crawler mashup, and a mystery solving game called Lucifer Within Us.
Awesome. And I'm Jenny Windom. I'm the communications manager for Rose City Games. We are currently publishing a lovely little title called Garden Story, as well as developing our own game called Floppy Nights. And I'm really excited that everyone's here today. So before we start discussing what representation looks like in the industry and discussing sort of the changes that we can hopefully enact and help you figure out how to enact, I wanted to discuss what this panel is not, because the titles are hard. It's a bit of a misnomer in the sense that while we're going beyond 101, there's really only so far we can go in 1 hour. So while we're going to try and do our best in talking about why active work in the space and topic is still needed, I want to really emphasize that this is still just scratching the surface for what is happening and what can be done in this space to increase representation of underrepresented voices. Also, we are human, and so thus we will have limitations, we will have blind spots. In the composition of this panel, we have not been able to represent every facet of folks in the industry or people wanting to be in this industry. So please keep in mind that while we're all working towards progress, that this, again, is really a stepping stone and just the start for a lot of change that we hope can happen. And so my first question to you all, my fellow panelists, is how are indie games and the indie industry in particular uniquely situated to be a place where diversity and representation can flourish?
Yeah, I guess I can start. I think one of the things that is so great about indies and all that is that the barrier to entry to games and to making games is generally quite low. Like, when you want to make money from it and be successful, that's like a whole other story. But the ability to make games, to create the game, to just start is wonderful. Like, especially like itch.io, like, and like Twine games, and like there's so many stories that you can tell, just like if by doing it as a hobby. So I think the fact that we aren't limited by, let's say, publishers, and like I get it, like there's people in decision making spots in bigger studios, let's say in like AAA studios, who are like, this is what our market research says, this is what we're interested in, and this is generally the kind of thing that we want. And generally in those positions you have people who are like white cis hetero male, so not having to go through all of that in order to create something that to express yourself, to express a story, to do whatever, I think is generally quite amazing. And that's how, at the start, indies can help diversity flourish.
Cara,
I
you
think
look
in
like you have
addition to
something.
that, yeah, I was trying to put the words together in my head. I think in addition to that, indies are very uniquely positioned to enable people to tell their own stories. I think that a lot of times when you're working with a publisher, they're more concerned about mass marketability, and so they want to be sure that the story that you're telling appeals to the most people. And for that mass marketability, the prevailing wisdom is that the stories that should get told are the normal stories, like a very white perspective, usually a fairly male perspective, just generally the same kinds of stories that we've already heard, instead of stories told from an LGBT creator about their own like coming of age story. And so indies are very uniquely positioned to enable people to tell the story that they actually want to tell without necessarily worrying about whether it's marketable. And I believe that it all is actually marketable, because as it turns out, human stories appeal to humans.
No. What?
But it'll take a little while, I think, for the industry at large to catch up to that idea.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. I think there are so many stories that come out of passion. It might sound pithy, but it's just that story that people really want to tell can come from these tools, which I think, Victoria, you've already spoken about. The tools are getting much more accessible. People with even not expensive hardware can start building, and they can find resources online to learn from inexpensive to free libraries. I think the indie community as a whole is very welcoming in sharing resources, just to get that spark started. And some of that lives on Twitter, some of that lives on Discord channels. And I think that's the beauty of some of this. It's not behind like completely like closed doors. People, when they see cool things, they want to know more, and others are willing to really share in that. I think that there's that joy of energy, where people just want to tell stories, and people want to hear stories that resonate with each other. I think there's a certain sense of like also universality in the midst of finding that kind of specificity as well. Like we have our local stories of our lived experiences, but we also share some universal values, and that's, I think, so much of the joy in sharing that.
Yeah, it feels to me like a lot of the issue in the past has also been that when marginalized stories have come to the forefront for sort of mass scale consumption, they've been told by people who are not of those backgrounds. So it's a lot of stereotype portrayals of, these people do this thing in this way, and it ends up with a lot of the tropes that you end up establishing, right? Black folks are always the first ones to die in horror movies. LGBT folks can never have a happy ending. Like all these different ways that when these stories are really wrapped up in the theory of experience as opposed to the experience themselves, like, yeah, those stories end up ringing a little hollow. I know that when I was younger, I pretty much just was like excited about any sort of representation at all. But now being able to have this perspective where I can say, okay, well, like, it's great that Black characters are in this game, but like, can these not be trash characters? Can we have more than one? Can a Black woman be like part of a squad of can there be it's gotten to yes and as opposed to just yes. And I think that indies are specifically positioned to be able to do that because of all the reasons we just talked about. We have small teams that are able to tell actual personalized stories. And if if an indie game sells, don't let me quote numbers, because this is the place where everybody's going to see I'm out of my league. But like, an indie game can sell a proportionally smaller number of copies compared to a AAA and still be financially successful and can still be viable. The creators can still like keep the lights on, and so there's just more opportunity to dive into a niche, because so long as capitalism still does the things that it's doing, you don't need as much capital to be able to continue doing your work.
Yeah, I think you all really encompassed sort of why indies are uniquely positioned. You know, the ability for creators to tell their own stories, the cost being far lower than perhaps within a AAA situation, and the accessibility of tools and hardware and resources and community for people to be able to create these stories and create stories that matter to them and matter to others that have not been told. I wanted to take some time to highlight what indie games are specifically doing well in representation and diversity by having us kind of talk a little bit about specific games that we have encountered that we think have done a really strong job, and take a moment to celebrate these games. We don't want to go too deep into it because we do have a limited amount of time, but each panelist does have one game that they'd like to share. So maybe Victoria, if you wanted to take a second and talk about your selection and why it really resonated with you.
Yeah, so I think the first game that I wanted to talk about was Detention, which is a Taiwanese horror game, essentially, from Red Candle Games, I believe. And I wanted to talk about this because it was one of the... It's a horror game that's based off of Taiwanese mythology. And I think that's something that I didn't realize I was missing in a lot of games, where it was like, oh... yeah, like so many different countries have so many different like mythologies and so many different stories that like resonate with them, and also like histories, because like it's not just about mythology, it's also like historic events that are talked about in Detention. And I think, speaking from self-experience, so I'm Vietnamese, and Asia has this thing where it conglomerates all of its countries into one like three countries, right? It's like you got China, you got Japan, and you have Korea, which are all great. You know, it's lovely. But yeah, it's like when like South Asia, Southeast Asia, like there's all these other stories that I think, and cultures that you could explore that don't get talked about as much. And I think having like a game like Detention, like talk about a part of like I've never heard about like the mythology of Taiwan. Like I was like, this is fascinating, and I loved it. So that's a game that I wanted to talk about. But I don't know if anyone else wanted to also dive into theirs.
Yeah, I think for me, I really enjoy She Dreams Elsewhere. It's being developed by Studio Zavir. Davion Gooden is working on a project that I think really provided this like experience in blackness that I don't see very often in the indie space in particular. It's a game that deals with friendship, with mental health, but it also provides it from a perspective that just is... It was really refreshing, I guess. It made it to me felt like I was entering into a space that wasn't pulling punches to try and appeal to sort of the lowest common denominator, right? Being able to like hear music that has words in it that I generally wouldn't play around some friends of various backgrounds. You know, there was just something for me that was very validating, to think that somebody was like, I feel confident enough in this perspective that I'm going to develop this into a game that everybody is going to consume, regardless of like the ways that I, in my own lived experience, have had to sort of like be really cautious or kind of tiptoe around the different spaces in which I introduce or dial back my blackness to try and make sure I'm palatable to the audience. And so for me, that was a game that it's not out yet, but is even just playing the demo was really powerful for me.
I wanted to talk really briefly about Pumpkin Days, which is created by Pumpkin Interactive, which is a Black-owned studio. And I want to talk about Pumpkin Days because I very much enjoy playing like casual farming simulation type games with a focus on relationship building and that kind of thing. But I end up being extremely frustrated all the time because it's so difficult to create myself in these games, because there tends to be a very wide array of options as far as lighter skin types go, and also kind of straighter white hair goes. And there tends to not actually be that many skin color options for darker skin tones, despite the fact that there is a huge variance in them. And there also tends to really not be more than 1 or 2 options for black hair. And when I started playing Pumpkin Days, not only does it have all of those things, but it also has controls for body type, controls for how you would like your character to be referred to. Just basically the most thorough character creation I've almost ever seen anywhere. There was so much choice for you to be able to mold this character to however you want them to be. And I think that that's, despite the fact that larger studios kind of know that it's important, I personally have been really disappointed even by kind of fancier, like I'm thinking of like MMOs or like Skyrim, those kinds of character creators where you technically can have your character be a darker skin tone, but I find those tones don't really look human. I don't know a very kind way to put it, but it doesn't, like, I don't tend to see those shades in real life in the same way. And I think that it's kind of an afterthought for a lot of people putting in these other options for other people to play as, that they put them in there and they think that will be good enough, instead of kind of thinking about, but does somebody actually look like this? Would somebody actually choose this? Does this actually reflect a person and their choices and how they want to appear? And so when I started playing Pumpkin Days, I was very floored by how thoroughly they covered a bunch of different options. And so that's why I wanted to talk about them.
Oh man, what a tough act to follow. After Detention, She Dreams Elsewhere, and Pumpkin Days. The reason I say this is now I feel embarrassed to, of course, present my own game. But I am very... I'm working with a team who honestly inspires me every single day and every single moment. And our game Solid State is really drawn by my excitement to really explore more of my hyphenated identity as a person of diaspora. How can I go back and face like the homeland of my ancestors, for example, to kind of just understand a little bit more about what they've gone through. So in that kind of context, I started writing this narrative-driven game with a lot of choices embedded within it, about this young hacker by the name of Chloe who goes to a city under great surveillance and explores these nuances of different ideas from the people whom she has much more access of data to. But even so, like her... what I really wanted to illustrate with this is like, even with more access to data, sometimes you make emotional choices. You make very intimate choices, even if you might have access to more data than other people in a surveillance state. And I think I've been exploring this idea of like just a lot of limitations that sometimes we feel like we come across in our day-to-day lives, with the sense of like, should I just be apathetic about everything that's happening around me? And trying to find that sliver of hope, to like, how can we contribute back? How can we understand ourselves in this bigger picture of all of these things happening? And of course, like not knowing where our identity lies. So I really wanted to share that experience with other people. And on our team, of course, we have a very diverse team as well. I'll just name a few people who are so crucial to helping this project. For example, Siege, he's our artist, and you can see his character art behind us, as well as on my wall here. And, you know, he has a hyphenated identity too in many ways. Like he has family in Jamaica, as well as in Canada, as well as in Britain. So like, and he's a Black man living in Canada now. So it's really important for me to have his voice and his art shine through. Yeah, we just have so many wonderful folks on the team, but I won't monopolize the conversation.
Not at all. Well, and I think everyone has picked games that have highlighted so many specific things that can be done to bring just underrepresented voices into the industry, whether it's in the game through character creation, through hiring practices and making sure that your team has a range of voices to inform the game. So, we have through talking about these games really illuminated a lot of things that we are loving in the industry, that people are doing great, again sharing stories, highlighting their own experiences, and hiring diverse folks. But I think in celebrating what is being done well, I think also that does kind of offer up I guess insight and a door to say, well, what could we do better? And so my first question to you all on that, in that realm, is what are some of the specific challenges that marginalized folks and voices still face when entering this industry? And I'd like to specify first as developers. Like, if you are trying to create games, what are some of the challenges that we still have in front of us?
I've seen one of the issues that happens is that a lot of larger companies tend to feel that their contribution towards diversity is to hire diverse developers and creators, but then they just kind of just drop them into the company and kind of expect them to do all of the work of informing the people around them and perhaps like steering games towards a more friendly lens. And that puts a disproportionate amount of burden on underrepresented developers who, in some cases, end up having to go into a workplace and arguing for things that are not well received by their fellow coworkers, and that they get kind of a bad reputation as maybe like confrontational or argumentative because the workplace culture has not been changed at all to make diversity a priority and to make these conversations important and safe when somebody has something like this to bring up. So I think that even when studios are trying to do a good thing by hiring from a diverse array of people, sometimes they just stop there. And I think that there needs to be a lot more done than just expecting the people that you're hiring to do that work alone.
Yeah.
I think for small indies who are trying to make it at the very beginning, I know very early on in the conversation I mentioned something about like people's passion. Unfortunately, I'm going to, in Act 3 of this conversation, I'm going to twist this a little bit and say, unfortunately, some people really do take advantage of the passion that people have, and especially in targeting marginalized communities or members of the marginalized communities, to really tokenize their contributions and say, as long as we're, seen as publicly supporting these people, then they can get away with other acts of which is actually discriminatory or gatekeeping of that nature. And I've seen that happen quite often because the kind of retaliation upon people who say that they don't want to be tokenized or made into some sort of model minority is that then they get shut out of these spaces as well because, at first these people created this space for them, even though they're different. And now how dare you kind of retaliate or act in a retaliatory manner just because you happen to be standing up for yourself, whether it's because you're asking for a little bit more of a higher pay or fairer pay or fair engagement, but instead, like sometimes even our dramas are must be kind of presented towards their agenda first, rather than a way of which we can live independently and thrive despite that. So like that kind of storytelling then gets twisted around to, well, how can that serve whatever established framework of which does not actually serve that marginalized community or some of its members, and so on and so forth. So I think I can really see that from a much more kind of indie perspective. For bigger companies, I think sometimes if there's like a case of harassment or discrimination, it's often like pinned down to like this is an individual issue, rather than like a systemic one. So it never gets addressed on a systemic level, in which what that means is that there are like situations in which it's beneficial for people to not address it on changing structure and the people at the very top. Rather, it's maybe just two women fighting against each other because they're catty, that sort of thing, and they happen to be minorities or gender minorities in the company. So
Yeah. No, I think, like, to build on that, a lot of the problems I've seen, and like I agree with what everyone has said, is definitely like a notion that somehow minorities need more mentorship when we're already qualified. We have years of experience, let's say, but somehow like the only thing people can offer is like, we'll give you mentorship. And it's like, that's great and that's lovely, and I get the thought behind it, but we need more than, we need to actually be hired. We can be more than just consultants. There is talent in the industry, and we need more than just mentorship, like, as I keep drilling down on, because it is infuriating to see qualified and like people who are amazing at their jobs have to work 50 times as hard because there's some systemic problems within the hiring process, let's say, or it's only bound by referrals, which I get, like, why people would like, hey, do you have a recommendation? But then that seems to group together like, okay, well, then you're just rewarding the people who are more talkative or who are more popular or who, you know, agree with you and who seem less like intrusive. So I think that really builds on it. And kind of moving on from that is also the fact, and I touched upon this earlier, is that a lot of games that get greenlit by bigger publishers, let's say, by who get the funding, are gatekept by, and not like in like a purposeful way, because like I get it, when publishers publish a game, they want to be excited about it. But the problem there is that a lot of people in those decision-making roles are not generally quite diverse. And I get it, you don't have to like every single game, but we need more and more people in more powerful positions that can make these decisions and can be the tastemakers that kind of lead games to become this more diverse thing that we all talk about but never really put into practice.
Just touching off that thing about the mentorship, it is a little bit insulting because it seems to place the onus on the developers out there a lot of times to say that, oh, maybe the reason you're not as successful in your career is because you need somebody to show you how to be more successful. And I think that kind of, because obviously the people offering these mentorship opportunities have very good intentions, but I think that disconnect points to a lot of the actual issues and why people aren't able to get into the industry, because people kind of assume it's just, oh, you just aren't talking to the right people, or you're just not doing something right, instead of understanding that there's actually barriers that need to be altered in order to allow more people in.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else had anything to add to that. I totally agree. I think there's this element of like doing diversity as this almost like marketing practice at this point for quite a few companies. And it can be really disheartening when you see, during like a Black History Month or a Women's History Month, that's when they do that diversity and they've checked their box, and all of a sudden that month is done and, oh, well, we did the diversity, so we good. And that's really not the case. The idea that this is something that, like, as all of you have mentioned, needs to be embedded throughout daily practice, throughout systems within companies, without just having it be sort of like a token event that you check off every year, like a holiday of sorts. Because this is based on lived experiences. These are people, and we can't just say that we did the thing and have it be that.
I know you said developers, but you brought up a point that I kind of want to chime in on.
Yes,
if that's okay.
Please do.
When you brought up the whole like Black History Month thing, I think in particular, A lot of these things feel relevant to me because, especially in the wake of Black Lives Matter protests and, you know, the murder of George Floyd, like, my DMs, my notifications, all that stuff blew up as everybody suddenly recognized that Black people were relevant in the game space. But then, like, since then, things have really quieted down. And I think there were a lot of us who were in the space who were just waiting for that to happen. We're like, okay, I get that everybody's interested right now, and I don't even mean to say that interest is disingenuous. Like, people watched the video or like heard about what was happening, are starting to understand this concept of systemic racism, and are like, I want to do something about this. How can I help? But I think that the difficulty is that this signal flare was popped by social media. And so everybody was paying attention to that. And then when the next thing happens, everybody pays attention to that. And that cause is relevant and necessary. And here in the game space, it was a wave of sexual harassment and assault allegations. And like, we need to pay attention to those things. We need to address those issues systemically. But we also have to understand that like each of those actions is going to require sustained effort. And so like, Zalivir Nelson Jr. had tweeted and was like, in 2 months, if you come back and you're not paying attention to these same streamers that you've started following or the people that you've started replying to, like, realize that you're having them go through all this work for nothing. And then in 2 months, he retweeted that and was like, I just want to point out that, like, it looks like that's kind of what happened. Like, and so it's not, I don't bring up that discussion to like excoriate somebody, right? It's like, I think that people genuinely care. I've seen more people have these discussions about how do we bring Black people to the table? How do we bring women to the table? How do we not just bring them to the table, but create a safe space to do so? But it also comes with like, when you make that commitment, recognize that you're making that commitment for an extended amount of time. You know, the white text on the Black background that you put on Twitter, like, expect somebody to come back 3 to 6 months and say, what did you do about this? And like, if you don't have an answer for that, you need to come up with one. And like, that's, I appreciate where people's hearts are at, but there becomes a point where your head has to be in it, and you have to be willing to do that work even when you're not feeling the initial impulsive reaction. And that's kind of where I think a lot of the industry has to make some of that shift.
I think that basically what you're saying is that people need to approach diversity as a lifestyle change and not as a task that they can just have completed. If you want the industry to be more diverse, then you need to make yourself and your life and your work and your consumption more diverse as a lifestyle change in order to get there. It can't be just a moment. It has to be an ongoing thing.
And so I'd love to turn our attention in the sort of final act of the panel to those actions that we can take as players, as fans, as developers, as just people who love games and love this space and want other people to be able to love it as much as we do. How can we start taking these steps to make diversity a lifestyle change for everyone?
Yeah, I think one of the... So I'm gonna say this, and it's a thing that sometimes infuriates me, but hello to the lovely people watching this panel. I sometimes wonder if the people watching this panel, like, if, like, who is watching this panel, right? Like, the people that we need to hear it. Sometimes I'm like, are they here? Like, are they listening to us? Sometimes the most infuriating thing, I think, is that we can say this all we want, but if it comes out of like a white cis man's mouth, everyone's like, oh my god, you're so amazing. and thank you to those people. Yeah. I know. And it's like, I get it. I get it, because it's like, I don't really get it sometimes, but it when it comes from a peer, when it comes from someone you're close to, you do tend to listen to them more genuinely. And I think what needs to happen is that these conversations do need to happen beyond our own personal circles, where we can talk about this safely, where we feel comfortable even chatting about this, right? Like, what we need is, like, when you're hanging out with your your buddies, your gamer friends, and you're just playing a game, and someone says something just like as a joke, like just kind of racist, kind of sexist, to point that out and to be like, hey, like, that wasn't really cool of you to say. And it doesn't, and like, it's just like even those tiny moments of like pointing it out to a friend and knowing like you have to keep your friends accountable. You might be in a little bit of an awkward situation. Just having those moments is so valuable to the industry as a whole, I think, and just like slowly makes the changes and progresses things so that we don't always have to deal with this ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I very much agree with that. I think that one of the most frustrating experiences that you can have is being friends or just having conversations. I grew up in Kansas, so just having conversations with people, trying to explain to them why something might be a problem or why something might need to be done in a specific area, and kind of having the person you're talking to receive that as, yes, something must be done, but not necessarily by me. I'm glad that I've been educated, and like just continue on about their day and continue on about their life. I find it especially frustrating because I'm half German, and so in Germany there's a concept called Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which more or less translates to personal responsibility for the past, in which it's culturally taught that we are each personally responsible for making sure that the bad things that happened in the past don't happen in the future, and we're personally responsible to keep making those decisions to push the world forward and make sure that we don't go back there. And I think that that's a perspective that would be wonderful to see more if people really did start first with themselves and not with necessarily pointing fingers at like, oh, the companies need to do more, or so-and-so needs to do more, but instead, we have the most control over ourselves. What can I do more? Like, what indie developers can I push to the forefront? What games can I buy and can I support and can I recommend to my friends that are really good and diverse that maybe they should know? What job opportunities can I push towards friends that I have that are minorities that might be looking? There's lots of little things that we can do that I think we tend to abdicate our agency for, because we feel, obviously there's lots of things that companies need to be doing that would make a lot of change, but I think we tend to diminish our own power in relation to that, and I think that that's an important area where a lot of us can improve.
Yeah. Actually, if I can just like super quickly tack onto that, I like 100% agree, but this is just like a tiny big pet peeve of like when you do recommend people for panels and for jobs and for whatever, please don't do it because it's like, hey, so like you're a woman, you should be there's a panel, hey, you're a person of color, can you be on my panel? Like, we have actual skills and we have things to talk, like, you don't need to, like,
yes.
Yeah, sorry.
It's not, you're not doing somebody a favor. You're not like charity handing out like this job opportunity to a person. It should be because you know that your friend has good things to contribute and that maybe, they're not in the circles that would push that information to them, so you can be the one to show it to them. Not that like, oh, we need a woman to fill this space. I know a woman friend. Not that kind of thing.
Definitely. I think there's an element of just humanizing and realizing how in diversity, what we mean is also diversity of skill sets, of experiences that, you can't just sub in another person. We're not like, I don't know, digital avatars here. And I think it goes back to that idea of like open hearts and kindness. Like I think a lot of people, going back to some early ideas that I'm just building on here, is like perhaps we have to really look into why we look at a white man and think that he is familiar, or specifically a white cis man, and think he's familiar and we believe his words. Why does he look particularly trustworthy? We really need to interrogate that aspect. If that's something of which you have that aspect with you. And maybe the reason why he looks familiar is because he's overrepresented in media. So play more games by diverse developers in which you're being put in positions of which you have to interact with a lot more people from different perspectives, from who look different from that of a white cis man. And rebuild that sense of familiarity with everybody in your, even if you don't get access to people in your own neighborhood who might look different, right? I think there's the power in that kind of media that we can have. And I also, I know this is a game recommendation panel, but may I actually recommend a book?
Absolutely. Yes. Please do.
Yeah, I think there's so much that we can do in terms of for ourselves and for our community, and it can start super small. So I've recommended this book before. It's by Adrienne Mary Brown. She's a Black writer, and her book is called Emergent Strategy, and it's literally starting from small and seeing in your day-to-day lives what you can do to be more open, to make sure that, like, structurally it is a lifestyle, like what Cara said. You're changing your lifestyle in order to encapsulate much more diversity. You're not just, checking a box. I'm sorry, I'm taking your words.
No, please.
So it's there is that level of when we're sharing these ideas that, like, we are sharing a bit of vulnerability, but we can't keep doing this if we're just shouting down a well. So there are times when I feel like the works that I try to put myself through, because my games do engage with that, like, political intersection, that, like, surviving itself feels like it's political at certain times, right? That the stories can be like we're a canary in a coal mine whenever we're, from marginalized background, but let us not just be a canary. Like, just listen as well. Don't just, look at our pain in a touristic way. Actually change your behavior over time as well, and embrace and learn more, and just keep seeing where those, like, universal values are, I think, in the midst of, like, all of our different little specificities and localities.
I think for me, I have a habit, for those who know me, of taking micro situations and zooming way out. So I'm going to do that for a second. I think that a really important part of recognizing the actions we can take right now is also recognizing the gravity of this specific moment. Of course, every moment in history is unique. Every generation has a challenge that comes to them. But in this particular moment, like, we're recording this, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before it's going to air. I don't remember the date. I literally have no idea what the world is going to be like by the time you see this recording. And it occurs to me that is I don't know that when I give you this, I don't know that when I give you this message, you will be in the space that I can usually count on when we're at PAX, we're all at this panel, regardless of wherever we're coming from, we're all sitting in the same room. We all, for a moment, have this opportunity to walk away from perhaps some of our normal lives and be able to focus on games and the community around games. But for many of us, the second that this is over, or perhaps even during this panel, we're going to be engaging with our lives in ways that are incredibly unique, sometimes really enrapturing, and sometimes really devastating. We've had a number of different cultural, political, and health-based crises over the course of 2020 that have been absurd. But over the course of that, as many times as I myself have become incredibly frustrated and just upset and downtrodden, I have also found so much hope in the ways that so many people have come together and stood up to the challenges that are being presented, the ways that people have been willing to take accountability, I'm sorry, I speak no German, but that concept of taking responsibility for the past and saying, what are the things that I can do in the present to make sure that we don't commit the errors of the past? What are the ways that I can look out for the people around me who perhaps I did step over or didn't notice until this moment? And what are the ways that I can learn how to deal with myself as a person who may have made mistakes before but wants to do better now? This entire discussion about diversity in games is just a single iteration of a multifaceted problem that goes through the entirety of our lived experience. And this is an opportunity that we have right now where we also see a bunch of forces that want to push back on that opportunity for progress. This is a time that I actually believe that we as gamers, we as people who are on the forefront of technology, of finding ways to interact with other people, of telling individualized stories, like, we literally are shaping the world right now, and we can continue to shape the world for the better. But we have to recognize that this is the moment to stand up and do something about it, because this opportunity may not last forever. It may not even exist in the same way when you watch this as when I'm talking about it. So, like, recognize the gift that you have to give to others, and like take that energy and do something with it.
Holy crap.
I know, I'm actually like almost about to cry right now.
I
I'm
know.
so emotional.
It's like, Josh, I didn't say you could make us cry today.
Sorry.
I feel it. It's so real.
It's so real.
Oh my god, can we just end the panel? I can't
I know.
We're done.
I'm like,
It's not my intention. I'm sorry. I get carried away sometimes.
That was
Never
important.
apologize.
It was great.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was unreal. So before, like, I'm not even gonna really attempt to add to that, because you can't. There's no way. So I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that to myself. Before we head out, though, I would like to take a moment for everyone to like breathe. Just take a deep breath, because we talked about heavy stuff today, and I also want to say thank you to everyone on this panel for taking the time out of your day and taking your energy and being willing to talk about this, because as Tanya, I think, mentioned, like, this is vulnerable and this is not easy, and this is also not a conversation that we have, this is not the first time we've had this conversation. And so I think I appreciate you all very much for being able and willing and like so open and honest for all of this. So thank you. Before heading out, just to like end on something, hopefully that people maybe can, I don't know, I don't want to say like to uplift, because I think this is all very inspiring and hopeful, but just maybe to end on a lighter tone. I'd love to go back to recommending some more games. So I'll kick this off, just because I don't want to be the last one talking for this one. I know y'all are gonna knock it out of the park. Okay, so the game that I would like to recommend is called Venba. It is a team of 3 folks, all based in Toronto. And they are making a game where you play as an immigrant Indian mom. And I love this for so many reasons. But this is a game where you are a mom. And I think that is another, just talking about groups that are represented or not represented in games. I have done a lot of research and a lot of work into finding games with moms that are not just like prop pieces at the beginning to initiate sadness. And this is not one of those games. And in this game, it's a narrative puzzle game about a mom who has immigrated to Canada, and in that process has lost or needs to sort of replace some of the recipes or fix some of the recipes in a recipe book that got damaged on that journey. And so it's a game where you cook delicious looking food. It's a game about family, and it's a game about home and what it means to be home. And so, yeah, if you're interested, Venba, I think it's at Venba Game, and it looks amazing.
My recommendation is Falcon Age. You might have seen some incredibly beautiful GIFs. I had to recommend it because it's amazing. It's like adventurous. You get to take care of a falcon. You're playing as woman of color. She's brown. So yes, you get to take care of Falcon from babyhood till older. You're playing as a woman of color. From also, I believe, an Indian background. You're actually working with you're actually traveling through a space in which it's clearly been colonized. So you're going to meet really interesting characters, but you're really defending homeland. And I think it's really such a beautiful landscape. You're dealing with like robots who are colonial in nature, and I think by exploring that, you also explore some incredible ideas of kinship with your found family, with your Falcon, and it's just incredible. The storytelling from the environment perspective is also incredible as well. It's fun, but it's clearly got this heart of being created by a very diverse team. And on the aspect of the team, like, I have so much respect for this team. They're distributed, but they are able to work so well together as an indie team. Aka does some great work. He's the lead on this project, and he's just a phenomenal person to chat with. And like the first time I chatted with him, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can like chat with you. Quakes a little bit, but yeah, it's just like he's the kind of person who just humanizes everyone, and just, you know, everyone has to start from somewhere. So he's working with a fantastic team of gender diverse people as well. So really coming to bring this whole game together with this fantastic picture of diversity.
Yeah, shout out to Aka.
He's amazing. Aka's so great.
Sorry.
Yeah, super dope.
Can it just be an
Super
Aka
dope.
appreciation
This
panel?
new title.
I'm actually going to change halfway what my recommendation is, but
Yeah.
I did want to give a shout out to Raji, which just came out on the Nintendo Switch, and it's a game about ancient India and looks amazing. I haven't played it, to be clear. But what I did actually want to, and I totally remembered it like as I was on this panel, is that there is a game that's come out of Montreal, and it is actually based on, it's an indigenous video game called Terra Nova. And it's fantastic. It's basically a game that invites players, to experience the first contact between settlers and indigenous people in this like post-apocalyptic world, where there was like a terrible climate change thing that happened, and you kind of land in this world in the future, and you basically get to explore it and like experience this. And I think it's one of those things that's I don't think has gotten a lot of attention, and I really want Terra Nova to have the attention it deserves, because it is created by a student, I believe, or probably not a student anymore at this point. But yeah, so Terra Nova, game about indigenous culture and basically experiencing that whole like first contact.
Wrote that down.
Yeah,
That
me
sounds
too. That sounds
really
incredible.
cool.
Yeah, that sounds super good.
Yeah, I had to type very, very quietly.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna need everybody to send me their notes after the panel.
Perfect. Yes.
I got two quick ones, and they're both web-based and they're both free, so you can go and check them out. You can open some browser tabs if you are ADHD like I am and need to be doing things while you're doing things. The first one is called Sweetheart. It's by Kat Small. She is a Black game developer who put together a short narrative game about essentially like living a week in the life of this Black woman who is a student. She experiences various levels of like microaggressions while also just like living her life. And it was a really... It's a wonderful game. It's in some ways very light. It in other ways can be very heavy. But I think that Kat lends a bit of her personality and perhaps her own lived experience in some ways to this game that I think for a lot of folks who are especially looking for more information about like, I'm not quite understanding some of racial discourse, so I would like to better understand what it's like to be in some of these situations. Sweetheart, which is Sweet X Heart for folks who are looking for it, is a really good game to check out. The other one that I would bring up is called The Evolution of Trust. This game is basically my game Bible. It's by Nikki Case. They're a developer who has worked on a number of different projects, but a number of their instructables have been really compelling to me. The Evolution of Trust basically utilizes game theory to explain why the internet feels like a dumpster fire so often. It's really fun. It's interactive. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to play through. But I think that once you have played through it, it makes you look at all of your interactions on the internet a little bit differently. And especially when we're going into sort of this world state where it can be very hard to trust even the people around you, having a better understanding of the different things that you can try to create to make situations have more trust. It's an absolutely beautiful game. Cannot recommend it enough.
And that would leave me for last. And the game that I would like to recommend is called Herald, an interactive period drama. And I love this game so much. But there's a lot of potential spoilers, so I'm just going to read the synopsis. It takes place in the 19th century, and you are Devin Rensburg, a steward of mixed heritage working on board the HLV Herald, which is a ship sailing for the land of your birth, the Eastern Colonies. And so it is an adventure, heavily narrative driven kind of mystery game that like slowly unfolds itself to you as you play. And it really shows how wonderful it can be to have a protagonist who is not just a person of color, but is bringing their perspective to the narrative. And so I absolutely adore novels that were written in this kind of time period of the 1800s and 1900s, but you don't often get to see that perspective of somebody who is a mixed race or of not the upper class or who is from a colonized nation. And because of the way that this game is set up, this character has the ability to maneuver through social situations and gives the player a lot of choice in how to maneuver through these social situations and kind of maybe manipulate isn't the right word, but I guess influence the situations that are happening to the other characters on board of both higher social status and lower social status of you. And the whole time the character is also exploring their identity and the connection between their present and their past, where they grew up, and their family. And it's so beautiful and it's so engaging, and I just think a lot of people would enjoy it. So yes, go check Herald out.
Definitely going to do that. That sounds so interesting.
It's so good.
I don't need it, but I want it, and I love it. So that is our time together. That is the end of our time together. Before we head out and get ready for that will be on this live stream, I'd love to have y'all take a really quick second to just restate your name, and maybe where the best place folks can find you if they are really excited about what you do and want to stay in touch in that way.
Hi, my name's Josh. I run a site called Intelligame, and we make connections between games and the real world. You can find me on Twitter at Wallstormer. You can find Intelligame content at Intelligame+. You can find us on social media at Intelligame+, and we stream at least once, usually twice a week, on Twitch at twitch.tv/Intelligame+.
Hello, my name is Tanya again, and find me on social media as Vivid Foundry on both Twitter as well as Instagram. And you can also find my website as solidstategame.com. And if you want to find out more on Steam, you can just search Solace State. By the way, it's not spelled solid like Solid Snake. It is solace as in like haven and solace. So that's where you can find me most of the time. And I'm most active on Twitter. Sometimes I'm on the Instagrams as well.
I'm Cara Hillstock. You can find me on Twitter or Twitch under Cheratomo, Cherato. I stream a lot of diverse indies and cozy games and narrative-driven games. And I also recently put out a short 1 hour long game called To Be With You about a girl who, it's semi-autobiographical, and it's about a girl who moves in with her long-distance boyfriend and struggles to keep the relationship together as it starts going south.
Hello, I'm Victoria Tran. You can find me on Twitter at Tran, and you can find what Kitfox Games is up to, which is the studio I work for, at Kitfox Games on Twitter, and also on Discord, discord.gg/kitfoxgames.
Awesome. And finally, I'm Jenny Windom. Again, I work for Rose City Games, so you can find out all about what we do on Twitter at Rose City Games. And you can follow me at Kimchika25 or find me on Twitch, where I also stream a lot of indies. And
she's so good.
Shh. And that's just twitch.tv/Kimchika. So with that, we're done. Thank you again for joining us for this online panel, and I hope you all have a great day.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.